Very good F words, not to be confused with my favorite F word. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Sarah and I make videos about health and fitness and all of those things in endurance sports. So if you're looking for that cool kids club, you know, the elusive table in the cafeteria in high school, you're not going to find that here. However, endurance-y things, I got you covered. You can hit the subscribe button. It's fast, it's fun, it's free. Very good F words, not to be confused with my favorite F word, but fun F words all the same. Hit the buttons. You're the best. But today's video, I want to talk about data screens for your computer or your head unit on your bicycle. There are almost limitless possibilities in terms of looking at your metrics in real time that could have some real utility for you in terms of your riding, your racing, training, whatever it is you're going to do on a bike. These smart little computers that we have open up a lot of possibilities for us to get some really valuable information. So I want to go through my data screens and show you what I use in particular, break down some of the more advanced metrics for those of you who may not be familiar, and hopefully give you guys some ideas as to how to set up your own training screens to meet your needs that might be beneficial at whatever stage in your training you are in. If you are new to this, some of this stuff might be a little bit abstract, but you can start to familiarize yourself with this information. And if you've been around for a while, perhaps this might give you some ideas to how to tweak your data screens. I know that I've tweaked mine over the years, and a lot of those ideas have come from other people in the cycling world or in these videos on YouTube that I've watched in particular. I'm going to share my screens, and hopefully it will be helpful to you. Now, there's a few things to bear in mind here. First thing is I'm not going to show you how to set up the data screens. I'm going to be using a Garmin device, but you may have a Wahoo, you may have a Hammerhead Karoo, you may have a Stages. There are a number of different head units out there, and there are a number of different videos out there from the manufacturers and from other people showing you how to go through and navigate the menu system. I'm not going to go through that here. I'm just going to show you my screens in particular. I choose to use Garmin, not sponsored unless they feel like it, but I like the way that the Garmins are set up. I like the ease of use factor. I like the fact that I can actually customize these screens right from the screens themselves in real time. I can kind of press and hold and highlight things and change fields. I don't need to use a computer or a cell phone to make these adjustments. So I like Garmin in particular, but you can use whatever you want. Most of these metrics will be available on every head unit. They're pretty much open source in that regard. Another thing to bear in mind with my head unit in particular, this is a 1030 series. This is one of the larger series head units on the market. It might even be the largest. I'm not entirely sure. This one, the Roam by Wahoo, I think the Hammerhead Karoo is pretty large. You have to bear in mind that when I'm showing you my screens, there may be a lot of metrics on these screens that might not be as readable or crisp when you're on a smaller screen. It just depends on what you want to be looking at, right? So if you have a 530 series, which is much smaller than this, having 7 different fields crammed on one page might be a little bit difficult to read. Depends on your eyesight and your tolerance for that type of thing, especially when you're moving fast. You're just trying to glance down and get things at a glance. So just bear that in mind if you're looking to maybe borrow some of these ideas. You may just have to add another screen. Most of these devices have the option to have different screens available to you so that you can kind of scroll through and you can utilize the real estate on your screen to the best of your ability. So just bear that type of thing in mind. The last thing I want you to consider is your own tolerance or your proclivities towards having this data available. There are people who get very much overwhelmed by the data and some analysis paralysis. Even people who are experienced, they don't like a lot of things on their screen. They get distracted, and what happens is when you get mentally fatigued looking at a lot of these data points, that leads to just general fatigue. It could actually impact your physical performance. Your RPE goes up, your willpower goes down. You have to basically evaluate your relationship with having this data available and on hand to you and right size the data screens for your purposes. The intention here is not to tell you that there's a right or wrong way to set up your data screens. It's to familiarize yourself with what's available, what might be of use to you, what's of use to me in particular for my type of training, and give you some ideas on how to deal with those things. Also, keep in mind that your relationship with data may change over time. You know, in the beginning, I was a lot more paralyzed by the data and more caught up in, it's like, oh, heart rate, oh, zones, my intensity factor, oh, my power, oh, you know, you're getting caught up in a lot of these data points and trying to manage them all and keeping them all in one particular baseline. And that's going to impact your training negatively. And with time and experience, I got more adept in being very indifferent towards the data in a way that I can take it, I acknowledge it for what it is. If I need to adjust, I adjust. Otherwise, I just leave it. I don't let myself get too distracted or pushed off course by the data. So keep those things in mind while we're going through this video, because this is not about force feeding something to your needs. Everybody has their own preferences and needs for their training. There's no right or wrong answer for setup, but you'll probably find when I go through some of these data screens that there are maybe a handful of metrics that are really those must-haves, right? Maybe your time, your speed, your power, heart rate, cadence, right? Your basic 5 there are things that you might want to include, and everything above and beyond that is based on your preference. So without any further blabbing about, let's get right into it. So my head unit, as well as a number of other head units out on the market, has the ability to set up what are called different profiles. They're basically recipes for different types of training that you're doing. It's extremely convenient. You can set up a number of them for different types of riding, because each thing that you do on the bike may require a different data screen setup, right? I don't necessarily need all the same metrics outdoors as I need indoors, or all the same metrics in racing as I do for general training. So I can pare those things down and select the data points that I need specific to those events or those riding styles. So it makes it really convenient for me to just have these set up. I have 4 profiles set up. I'm only going to go through 3 of them. Those are my road profiles. I'm going to spend the most time on this first profile because I'm going to spend the time to break down some of the more advanced metrics so you understand what they are. And then the other 2 profiles, which are my indoor and racing profiles, I'll go through why I selected the data points that I did, but I won't go into too much detail. So we'll start with what I call my road profile. This is just the default name that's used in Garmin. I can call this whatever I want, but my road profile is for my outdoor riding and training that is not specific to a race or competitive event. So this has the most metrics in there. This is where I want most of that data available to me and have it available if I need it. Now, I've got a number of different screens in here, but the first screen is my primary or my default screen, and this is what I'm going to be using 95% of the time when I'm free riding. And the other screens that I have available are really more for at a glance. I can scroll over and just take a look at something instantaneously and then move back to this main screen. But if I'm free riding around, this is the screen that I'm using. So at the very top, I have the metric called timer, and this is basically a stopwatch. So I use an auto pause feature, so if I stop or slow down at a stoplight, it's going to automatically pause this timer. I can also control the timer manually by hitting the button in the lower right-hand corner here. And this is what I use as a proxy for what's moving time, right? So if you're looking on Strava or Training Peaks, it's going to calculate the time that you are actually in motion or doing work. I don't want to be tracking time that I'm not doing work. So if my objective is to get 3 hours of endurance out on the bike, I want it to be 3 hours of work. I don't want it to be 3 hours, which is 20 minutes of stop signs, 10 minutes of stopping to refill my water bottles. I just want to calculate my moving time. So that's why I have the timer as opposed to a lapse time, which I'll show you on the next screen. The next metric, speed, pretty straightforward. We're pretty interested in how fast we're going. Next metric down here is power. Power is an important one. If you are riding with power, I recommend having power on your screen to kind of evaluate how hard that you're working. I use instantaneous power when I'm free riding rather than averaging power like 3 second, 5 second, 10 second, because I'm not really staring at the screen too much. If I'm not really looking at a particular deliverable, I don't need to average that out. But if I wanted to change it, I can just press and highlight on this unit here and then select a different data metric here if I wanted to change that on the fly. So I have that type of flexibility. I have cadence and heart rate in the lower left-hand corner. Pretty straightforward, right? The sense check on how fast my legs are moving and how fast my heart is beating. I've got my distance in the lower right-hand corner here. How far have I gone? Pretty straightforward. And then I have calories on this main screen here. And this was a recent addition for me. I don't really look at the calories in terms of, oh, I'm looking to burn a certain number of calories, right? My focus isn't cycling for weight loss. I'm cycling for performance. However, I've always had a hard time fueling properly on the bike. I tend to go a little bit upside down on calories sometimes when I'm riding, and it often comes to my detriment in terms of bonking or trying to basically resuscitate myself before a bonk. And I've tried things like timers. I've tried things like deciding, okay, if I'm doing intervals, I'm going to do it after the 3rd interval or at a certain point during the ride at this gas station or this corner, I'm going to fuel up. And I always just ignore those signals. But what I noticed is when I put the calories on this main screen, because it's just right in front of me, I have to look at it, it's right in my eye line. What I do do notice is that I get some sticker shock from that number. So if I'm 30 minutes into a ride and maybe I've already burned 350 calories, I might be working pretty hard, calories based on power. I did a whole video on that. I'll link that down below. But for, a woman of my size with my power, 350 calories in a half an hour is quite a bit. And if I haven't fueled up pretty well before the ride, I look at that number at 350 calories, like, whoa, I'm on track for 650 to 700 calories in the first hour. I've got a 4-hour ride in front of me. I can't be screwing around. I better start fueling and bringing things on board. It might entice me to take a few swigs of my water bottle that I might have some calories in, or grab a gel, a bar, things like that. So I've seemed to do a lot better looking at that number and seeing how many calories I've burned in real time to better manage my fueling. Like, I can't really ignore that number when it starts ticking into the 3 and 4 digits, right? I'm a little bit more cognizant of that. So that's what's on my main screen there, and I find that to be very effective. Now, these ancillary screens I have are more secondary for me, right? I use these maybe 5 to 10% of the time, depending on the ride. So this next screen here, I talked about the timer versus a lapse time. This is where I have a lapse time, and the reason I'm measuring that on there is because I want to understand my efficiency and my ride time. So if I'm riding around and I'm going for my 3-4 hour endurance ride, and I feel like I'm stopping a lot, I can actually take a look at this number. And let's say I have my timer says 3 hours, but my elapsed time says 3 hours and 30 minutes, and I didn't stop anywhere or change drinks that might have taken 10 minutes. Now I'm looking at maybe 14% of my ride time is spent at stoplights. That's detracting from the quality of my ride. That's introducing more rest than I would have needed to for maybe like an endurance ride or a tempo ride. Maybe that's not a good route for the next time, right? Too much traffic, too many stoplights. Sometimes you can't avoid those things, but if you're planning out a route and you realize how inefficient you are, I like to have that available as a sense check for me. The next field down is a little bit more advanced. This is kilojoules, and this is a measurement of your power over time. So, watts are a function of joules times seconds. So this is the number of joules that you've basically expended throughout the course of your ride. And this becomes an important metric when you're looking at things like fatigue resistance. So how high is your endurance and your fitness getting in terms of your ability to continue to execute power over time? Sometimes hours aren't enough because there's 2 hours of riding hard, and then there's 2 hours of riding easy, and 2 hours of riding moderate, right? So this kilojoules is more of an objective measure of how much power or fatigue you've baked into your legs. And after 1,000 kilojoules, 2,000 kilojoules, right, that basic expenditure, how much power do you still have in the tank? So this is not something you necessarily focus on in your first year or 2 years of cycling, but it's an interesting metric to start keeping track of because it lets you know, hey, after I've put so much load into my legs, how much longer can I continue to take on that load? So a little bit more of an advanced metric, but it is an important one, especially as you advance in your training, if you're training for performance. The next one down here is IF, that stands for intensity factor. So the intensity factor just tells you kind of as a percentage of your FTP, how hard you're working. So it's a decimal form. So if you're looking at 75% of your FTP, it would be 0.75. It can be over 100% because you can go over 100% of your FTP. So that would just be 1.05 if it's 105% of your FTP. And the reason that that has value is you either have a deliverable that you're going out to meet. So maybe you want to go do a 4-hour free endurance ride and you want to be at your high level of your zone 2. So between 65 and 75% of your FTP. Well, you're not going to necessarily memorize all those numbers, and you can certainly look at average power, but this can potentially give you a better appraisal in terms of percentages, so you don't have to do math in your head, right? So if I'm at 0.70, I'm on target. If I'm at 0.80, well, I'm a little above target and I'm above my endurance zone, so now I'm in that kind of sugar burning tempo zone where I don't want to be. And if I'm at 0.50, I'm going way too easy. So it gives you a quick sense check as to whether or not you're in target. Or maybe you did a really hard group ride and you think, wow, this really felt like a race-like ride. How hard was it really? You can swipe over, take a look, 0.95. Oh yeah, this is definitely a race-like effort. So that's how intensity factor plays in. And then TSS, I'm not going to go into too much specifically with this metric. I did an entire video on Fitness Explained where I talk about metrics like TSS. I will link that down below as well if you're interested in that, if you haven't seen that already. But this is kind of a combination of kilojoules and intensity factor. It's basically the training stress points or score that you get from your ride. It's how much load you're baking into the system. And when you're more familiar with fitness and fatigue and freshness, you can kind of make an appraisal of your rides. Like, how does this rank against my current fitness or my benchmark, right? If my CTL is 95 and I put in 95 TSS, I'm basically maintaining. If I'm above that number, I am building my fitness or overreaching, hopefully in a functional way. And if I'm under that number, I'm probably losing fitness or I'm recovering. So that's where that TSS comes into play. Sometimes you want to kind of know throughout the ride how you are. It's not something I constantly look at, but if I'm more in a free ride, I might want to take a look at that number. The bottom left-hand corner, I just put total ascent in there in case I'm doing a route that I've planned on Strava or through my Garmin. Maybe I know that I have 6,000 feet of climbing and I'm halfway through the ride and I see that I'm at 4,000 feet of total ascent, then I know I have 2,000 left to go and that the back half of the course is going to be a little bit less lumpy than the front half of the course. And then the bottom right, I have grade in case I'm curious about a particular grade on a climb. Maybe it's a new climb to me and I want to swipe over and take a look at how steep it is in a particular section. It's there for me in case I need it. The next screen here is more of a status screen. This is something I use only periodically, but it's there in case I need it. Top is my Di2 battery life, so I have electronic shifting on my bike. I want to check my battery because it's not something that you charge on a daily or weekly basis. It's usually a minimum of 45 days, so you can kind of lose sight of how high your battery life is. So I put that right on my screen so I can glance at it every other ride or so. The next thing I have on here is my gearing. So the electronic gearing allows you to look at that. It's not hooked up right now or connected, so it's showing four chain rings in the front. That's obviously going to change once it reads my particular unit and connects to the Di2, but it'll tell me what gear I'm in. And it might seem like a silly thing to have on a screen, but there are actually some benefits to understanding what gear you're in without having to kind of look down and count and read what gear you're in. And I can think specifically to things like maybe sprint workouts, right? Trying to figure out how to maximize in a sprint, especially if you're not a strong sprinter. There are some good workouts out there where you try to kind of find a block of maybe 4 or 3 gear ratios, and you try to do a repeated sprint through all those gear ratios. You might find that one of them elicits a higher power. It's just like a really good balance for you in terms of the torque and then the cadence. And it might be, it's not always the 5311 and mash the shit out of the pedals, right? It might be the 5317. It just depends on what it might be for you and your particular physiology. And having that visual indication, I might be able to use that. Again, it's rare, but it's there. It's convenient. I don't have to go hunt for it. I just have a screen that has it on there. The next 2 items on there are average heart rate and average cadence. I don't always need that. Those are more for steady state ride. If I'm curious, maybe time trial, endurance ride. If I'm doing some cadence work, that might be effective. But again, I rarely use it. Those I look at more of after the fact, but it's there if I want to kind of get a sense check in the middle of a ride. And then the bottom ones are normalized power and average power. So a lot of you guys have probably seen average power when you're looking on Strava. It's front row center, and I don't know how I feel about that because average power on its own is not the most effective metric. Now, if you're riding just 200 watts, even for an hour, your average power is going to be 200 watts, and that's fine. You know that. That's perfectly effective. But let's say you're going out for maybe some hill repeats, and you're going uphill at 400 watts, and then you're coasting downhill. And you're going uphill 400 watts, maybe it's for 4 minutes, and you're coasting downhill for 2 minutes, right? Your average power is not going to be that high. I think it's going to end up being based on your weighted averages. It's not just high and low. So I think it's gonna be around maybe 265 watts. And you're gonna look at that and say, wow, that really wasn't that hard of a ride, depending on what your FTP is. I'm just picking raw numbers out there. But you might think in terms of your power capacity, 265, man, I feel like I was working a lot harder than that. Well, that's because you're averaging in all of those zeros, and that's not necessarily telling you how hard you worked. That's where normalized power comes into play. And normalized power is a metric that was established so that it can measure the physiological cost of a ride. So it's calculating your average power differently. So what it does is it takes your ride into blocks of 30 seconds. And each 30 seconds it averages out the power. And the purpose of doing that math is to kind of level out that curve a little bit. It takes out all of those peaks and valleys and that lumpiness, right? That 20-second spike when you're trying to get over a short little hill or that little bit of coasting, right? You're averaging it within those 30 seconds. And then it takes all those 30-second chunks, it raises them to the 4th power, it averages those together, and then it takes the 4th root of that. And the reason that it's raising that to the 4th power is because there's a capacity to figure out a more accurate normalized power with a calculus function or an integral function, but realistically the Excel formats and a lot of these programs are not capable of doing that. So this is the way to get the most accurate, and raising things to the 4th power just gives you more digits to work with so that you can get right down to the ones place in your 3-digit power more often than not. It's going to tell you that with more accurate detail. You can make it even more accurate by going to the 5th, the 6th, the 7th power. However, we don't measure our watts and look at our watts in terms of, tenths or hundredths. So we only need to go to the 4th power to kind of get that 3-digit number as nice and accurate as possible. You don't really need to understand the math. All you need to understand is that What that math is doing is really chopping off those extremes, top and bottom, to give you a better understanding of what you were doing during those working sets. So your normalized power 99% of the time will be higher than your average power because it's just a function of averages, right? The only time it gets to the point where it's lower than your average power is if you're doing a really short interval or like rides under 10 minutes. Just that mathematical function doesn't work very well. It's a math problem and not really that your normalized power is lower than your average power. So typically speaking, your normalized power is going to be higher than your average power. Now, why is that important? Well, there's a metric called variability index, and it's an indication of how variable your ride is. So you can review that after the fact, but it's basically a relationship between these two numbers. It's written as a ratio. So it's your normalized power to your average power. So if you're riding that steady 200 watts for 1 hour, then your average power is obviously going to be 200 watts, but because you don't have any 30-second ups and downs in those averages, your normalized power will also be 200 watts. So 200 divided by 200 is 1. Now, as that numerator goes up, then that ratio goes up, right? So it might be 1.1, 1.2. The closer that number is to 1, the more steady state a ride is. So that is where your time trialists, your Ironman athletes, or your half Ironman athletes, that's where they are going to live, very steady state. So they want to get to as close to 1 as possible. That's the purpose of their riding, is to keep things as steady state and eliminate as many of the spikes that they can, maybe 1.02 or below. As you move into different types of ridings, you're going to find more variability. Racing can go upwards of above 1.2. Now, the reason that might become important to track is like, yeah, there's going to be some variability. I'm going over hills, or I'm attacking, I'm doing this, that, and the other thing. But the idea is to keep that variability index as low as is possible for that type of riding. So that doesn't mean you want to force everything to 1, but it speaks to efficiency. So if you are in a flat circuit or crit race, you don't want your variability index to be 1.5. That means you're surging a lot, and that means you're burning a lot of matches, and you're reducing your ability to perform as you get closer to the end of the race. The reason that you'll see things like that is maybe you're kind of drafting off the back of the pack, and you're kind of coming off and getting back on, and then you're coming off and you're surging to get back on, or maybe you're letting gaps open up in turns, and you're not being as efficient with your power, and you're burning more matches and digging more into your reserves than you need to. You want to try to smooth out that variability index the best that you can by riding efficiently, learning how to take turns properly, learning how to kind of draft appropriately and own your place and not feel like you're being pushed around. So variability index is a more advanced metric, but it is something important to learn about as you are being maybe more performance driven in your riding. So you might be racing, you might be going for segments or KOMs. Those types of things, they become a lot more important when it comes to your variability index, because you want to be able to go faster for longer. That's the purpose. And if you burn up all those matches or burn up all of your reserves with a higher variability index, you're not going to go as fast in the long run. The next screen I have on here is just a more graphical screen. It's not going to show you this screen very well because I don't have my power meter hooked up, but this is specific to my pedal-based power meters. It just gives me the pedal dynamics that I have going on, so it will show me graphically left, right power, as well as the power phase, so kind of where I'm applying power in the pedal stroke. Obviously, most people are in that downstroke, but it'll kind of show me graphically around the 360-degree circle where I'm applying that power and where I'm kind of releasing that power. So I can see that in real time. This next field down here is for platform center offset. This is a metric that's available, I think, with PowerTap pedals, definitely with Garmin pedals, not with Assioma pedals for the first version. But what platform center offset is a measurement of where along the center line of your pedal platform you are applying the most power. Now, some people just default think that you need to be right down the middle, that you know, right in the center of the pedal. And what this speaks to is your cleat positioning and your fit on your bike. So they think that they need to adjust their cleat position so that your power is most weighted on the center of the pedal platform. And then those folks end up with things like knee pain, because what happens a lot of times is your shoes are actually asymmetrical to counteract the fact that we tend to maybe be towards one side or the other. Well, if you try to force your cleats to combat those shoes, to get that pedal or platform center offset of 0, you're going to lead to injury. It's not about trying to get to a particular number with platform center offset. It's about getting a good fit and understanding where those numbers are. So with my shoes and my fit, I know where my platform center offset is, and if I change my cleats or maybe something comes loose and I get a shift, I can see if something has shifted off of my baseline. Okay, so it's not important what anybody else has. It's important where I'm the most efficient, where I'm the most comfortable, and then I want to mimic that. So maybe I do need to make a cleat adjustment because something has drifted, or I've changed my cleats but I didn't line them up quite perfectly. I can go ahead and use this screen here to make those micro adjustments to make sure my fit is correct. And the bottom two metrics here are just a numerical representation of my power phase. So, you know, how many degrees of the circle I'm using. So I typically start my power phase right at 0 degrees and end it right around, it's like 190 to 195. So that puts me right about the 7 o'clock position. So I'm using more than half of the pedal stroke, but I'm releasing at about that 7 o'clock position and kind of pulling up at that point back to the 0 position. That's what those screens are for, and it gives me a lot of value when I'm just maybe need to review something. Maybe I feel a little bit uncomfortable, or something seems to be changing over the course of the ride as I fatigue. I can get a quick sense check to see if maybe it's a positional problem. After injury, this might be effective, but don't ever use these types of metrics to force some kind of balance. If your balance for left-right pedal stroke is, you know, 45% left and 55% right, it's not worth trying to force those 50-50. There's not a whole lot of value there. There's a lot of science to kind of back up the fact that people try to force one side to be as strong as the other. You're just not going to get the return on your investment there. But understanding what your baseline is, if you have those metrics available, and then to see if things drift out of place after fatigue or after injury, that could be something effective for you to kind of sense check every now and again. And this screen is really helpful in doing that. So those are the main screens that I use for my outdoor training and free riding. Now there's some optional special use case screens that I'm going to show you real quick here. The first one is when I do outdoor structured workouts. When you use a workout that's ported from something like Training Peaks or Trainer Road, Garmin will actually open up this default workout screen. I'm not really compelled by this screen, to be honest with you. It kind of gives you like a power value and a graphical representation of where you are within the target. It gives you the graph, and it gives you the duration of the interval. I want a little bit more, so I have attached to it my own custom screen, and what this shows you is how much time is remaining in the interval, what the 3-second power is. I can change that to 10-second power if I want it for maybe a longer interval. And then I have my step average power, and that's basically telling me within that interval where my average is. So it shows me at the top what the deliverable is. So for a warm-up, 100 to 130 watts, am I in that range? Especially for a shorter interval, you can start to adjust. You know, if you're a couple watts shy, you can kind of try to push that number up a little bit. Then it shows me the graph here. It actually zooms in while you are in the middle of the workout, so it'll maybe show you this interval and next, or what's happening for the next 5 minutes, so you don't have to look at that eye chart. But I like to have that graph in there, and it actually draws the line like you would see in something like the graph screen in Zwift or on Trainer Road. It will actually draw your power line over those graph markers, so you can kind of see how adherent you are to the workout. And then I've got heart rate and cadence. Heart rate obviously is my sanity check, and then cadence in case I have certain cadence deliverables if I'm looking for like big gear work or something to that effect. That's what's available there. And the last screen that will show up if I'm navigating is the map. So that lives actually between these two screens. So if it will actually pop up a navigation if I'm using that. It will show me maybe, you know, 500 feet from a turn that I need to turn left on X street. But let's say there's construction on that street and I need to reroute. I can actually scroll over here to the map, zoom out when it's available to me. And I can say, oh, there's a parallel road up ahead. Let me just take that road and cut over, and it'll reroute me as long as I'm not going, you know, way off the beaten path to make sure that there's a road around. So having that map available in between those two screens, I need that from time to time. If I have to reroute on the fly, I can open up that map anytime I want. So the next profile we are going to look at here is going to be my indoor profile. So a really logical question might be with things like Zwift and Trainer Road and Ruby and all of these platforms that are going to log that data for me and upload those to any platform I like Strava, Garmin Connect, WKO, any of those programs out there. Why on earth would I need to use my head unit to log those workouts, right? Gone are the days where we have to look at these head units and do indoor workouts grueling with no outside stimulus or, you know, a nice large screen to work with. And it's for a couple of reasons. So the first reason is having redundant data. So if you've been on a bike for a while, you know crap goes wrong, right? Your computer might crash, the app might crash. You always want a more secure baseline for your data, especially if you're training for performance. You do not want to lose your data from that ride, especially when it's a key workout. You want to have that data captured. And to be perfectly honest, the most stable way to capture data is on a head unit or on a watch. It doesn't mean that they can't go wrong, but more often than not, they are pretty stable. You can almost always recover a ride if something happens or you have to reboot. It usually holds that in memory somewhere. So it gives me a nice, strong backup to have available just in case. Another reason that I want to use this is because of the advanced metrics that I get from the head unit specifically. So I talked about pedal dynamics, and there's a lot of dynamics that come with pedaling that you don't necessarily want to look at in real time, but you may want to look at after the fact. Well, Trainer, Road, Ruvi, Strava, Road Grand Tours, none of these platforms as of the time of making this video really collect that data for you. I don't need them to display the data, but it'd be nice if they just grabbed all of it and recorded it for you and then uploaded it to the other platforms. As of right now, they do not do that. So if I want to review those metrics, I need to have it on my head unit. I can't just get it from a platform because it won't save that data for me. So it's kind of a downside to the platforms. It's not something that every single person out there uses, but for those of you who do have the advanced metrics available, you want to have them at your fingertips, and you're only going to be able to do that as of right now with a device capable of recording those values. Another reason is to basically sense check my power. So when it comes to riding my structured workouts indoors, I very frequently use erg mode, especially for sustained efforts. I use erg mode with power from my indoor trainer. Now, a lot of people say you want that one source of truth for power, and I completely agree. You want consistent power values indoors and out. What I've found is that my indoor trainer power and my power meter pedals are within 5 watts of each other, not even. So, I mean, less than what you would expect for drivetrain losses. So I can trust those two power values to be consistent enough for what I need to use it for. And I find that erg mode is a little bit smoother and more responsive when I'm able to use the indoor trainer as the power source for the direct drive trainer. So I like to use that, and then this just gives me a bit of a sense check to see if those two power values match. So if I know that those are within a couple watts of each other, I'm right on. If they are way off, something needs to be calibrated, and before I get into things, I can stop, calibrate both, and then go on with my day. If I was ever going to join a Zwift race that's maybe sanctioned or has some results of value to them, a lot of times they like to have that secondary recording and that secondary power source to verify those things. I don't do many of those races, but it's nice to have that secondary value. So if people, you know, you have unimpeachable results if you have two power values that are pretty much identical or close enough to be considered negligible. It's not saying that nobody can cheat the system, but that's a lot of work to cheat on a digital Zwift race with very few stakes when all things are considered. So I like having that duplicate reading for the indoor trainer. There's also some things on here that I can get a heads up on that might not be provided in Zwift. Zwift only gives you some really cursory data, power, speed, heart rate, things like that. This will give me a few more advanced metrics that I can take a look at. So a couple of very simple screens. I'm going to go through this quickly because I've already talked about all of these values here, but my main screen, again, my timer. I have 3-second power here. That matches what I use in Trainer Road and in Zwift more often than not. My cadence, my heart rate. I have my calories, again, for fueling, and then I've got my kilojoules, so the total power expended. Again, I talked about the fatigue resistance there, especially for longer indoor rides. Those two values at the bottom can be very helpful for me. The next screen I have over here is just kind of my intensity factor, my normalized power, my average heart rate, my average cadence, a numerical value of my left-right power balance, and then TSS on there, like I mentioned before, just kind of measuring the total load of the workout or the stress score. Again, I put this pedal dynamics information on this screen, especially if I want to dial and fit. The best way to do that is I can do that on my trainer to make sure things are consistent with my known best state on my bike. So that's pretty much it. And the last screen I have here is the most simple screen. This is when it comes to racing. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, some people can't handle a lot of metrics on their screen. You really don't want to handle a lot of metrics on your screen when you're racing. You want only what's mission critical because you really need to keep your eyes in front of you and focus on what's going on pretty much every second. You have maybe a split second to glance down, so you only want what you 100% need. My default race screen is very simple. It is 5 metrics. So your timer, this comes in handy when you have a timed like criterium or circuit race when it's not really built on number of laps but based on time. If you know it's a 45-minute crit, you can kind of look at your timer and see when they might pull the plug on last lap. You've got your power, Again, you're not always going to be focused on this, but there may be times where you have to look at your power output to see if you're riding within your capabilities, what you have within you to kind of expend for maybe a breakaway or to catch back onto the group or to climb a hill, whatever that might be. Speed, people think speed is not necessarily important. You just go with the race and what will be will be. But speed can be important in terms of pacing, especially with like a critical move. So if you know that the peloton goes at about 26 miles an hour, and you go on a breakaway and the breakaway is going 25 miles an hour and you guys don't have anything more to give, your breakaway is going to get caught. So you might want to pull the plug and just get sucked back into the peloton because you're just wasting your energy at that point. You won't have anything for the end, or maybe you can try again. If you are in a breakaway, you do not want to be the person doing the extra work, talking about that variability index, surging too much, right? If you go to pull your turn and your breakaway group is going 27 miles an hour, you don't want to be doing the hero pull on the front at 29, 30 miles an hour. And people base things on power, so they go out and they hammer at their VO2 max or their anaerobic rate because they think that's what they're supposed to do. But when they pull off, the next 2-3 riders, they might only be doing, 27 miles an hour. So there's no point in you wasting your energy if the group is not going to pull along with you, and you can use speed as an indication as to whether or not your pull is doing, the minimum effective dose for your power to kind of keep that breakaway moving or that particular move going. The next thing I have on here is heart rate. I go back and forth with having that on there. It can be distracting. Nerves and adrenaline can lift that up. Sometimes it's effective, especially on a hot race, to just kind of monitor that. That can be something effective for a time trial or a triathlon. But I may ditch that out and I might replace that with calories on something like a longer effort. You should have a good nutrition strategy for a ride that might be an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours, but 3 hours plus, you might start to exceed what you thought your plan was going to need. Maybe the race was harder than you anticipated. That's where you can kind of adjust your plan based on the calories you've burned. So I might switch that out with a quick adjustment based on the race. And then distance, obviously if you have a distance-based road race, you kind of know what's left in the lap, what's left in the race. Maybe you plan on making a move, whatever that is, having those available. And that's all I have for metrics. The only other screen I have on my race screen, if this will cooperate with me, is a map. So having the map available can be really effective, actually. So what this will actually show is if I'm approaching a climb, it'll actually show the gradient change. So you may know that there's a hill and you might know it's around mile 6 somewhere, but this will kind of give you an indication if you want to just keep the map up on the screen. Oh, it's coming up soon here. I need to prepare. I need to get positioned well. I need to shift my gearing. Whatever I'm going to do, I can see where the climb is with respect to, my little avatar on there or whatever that is. And I can make the adjustments I need for that effort. You can also use navigation for this mapping screen, which can be really effective, especially when you're unfamiliar with the race course. Maybe you're traveling to a race. The onus is on you to understand the course. And a lot of times the race organizers will make available a GPX file or a Strava route that matches the race course. And you can download that right to your Garmin or your Wahoo or whatever you have, and it will actually give you the kind of turn-by-turn navigation so you won't make a wrong turn. I have seen people's races basically shut down because they didn't know the race course. And we get it, like you don't always have the opportunity to go and pre-ride the course. Maybe you're driving in the night before the race and you have to get up early, you have an early start, or you can't get out on the course because other races are in front of you. We get it. Maybe you can use some Google Street View, maybe you can study things on Strava, but there really is no replacement on the day for knowing precisely which one of those right turns is the right turn that you need to make. So I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, I did a race here right around the corner. I'm super familiar with this course. Like I use it as a training course sometimes. But the men's 4-5 race, a bunch of guys, their race done. They went the wrong way. I heard after the fact it was some kind of snafu with the marshals. I don't really know specifically what happened with the marshals. Maybe they did direct them in the wrong direction. But again, when it comes down to it, the onus is on you as the rider to know that course. There's a segment available in Strava for that course. It's listed right on the race website. There's zero excuse whatsoever to not be familiar with the course. If you go the wrong way, oh well. I was in a race several years ago, and I was with, I think it was about 17 women. There's not a whole ton of women in the racing scene around here. That was a big race. And this was a 4-corner circuit race. It wasn't like a crit. It was maybe 18 miles in total for one lap. And we were in the first lap, so we weren't really doing anything crazy. We weren't, nobody was attacking. We were just kind of settled in, almost neutralized. And we were maybe, I think it was a second turn. And it was a section where you can go straight and veer a little bit to the left, or you made the right turn that was requisite for the race. And there were marshals there, and I remember kind of seeing from a little further back that somebody had like their pickup truck parked there, and there were people standing there, and I was maybe fifth wheel back. And we were lined up single file, and it's not uncommon to be lined up single file with a field that small. We weren't really working that hard again. And all of a sudden, I see rider 1, 2, 3 start to veer off straight into the left instead of making that right-hand turn. I said, no, 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 right, right, right. And the girl in front of me, I don't know if she knew or if she heard me, and she turned right, and I turned right, and everybody behind me turned the right direction that happened to be to the right, and continued on with the race. It was a headwind section. We didn't attack those girls, but we never saw them again. We lifted the power a little bit to kind of keep speed up on the headwind section, but there was no way those 3 were going to catch up with the remaining, 14 of us or however many there were left. That was their race done because they went the wrong way. And if you're not familiar with the area, if you haven't pre-ridden the course, sometimes putting that on your head unit is the best thing you can do. And I guarantee you that first girl went the wrong way. Maybe she misread the directions of the flag, whatever went on there. But the next 2 girls may have known that it was a right-hand turn, but they trusted her judgment more than their own. And that's what happens when people are maybe not from the area. They trust somebody else's judgment first. If you are familiar with the course, if you put it on your head unit, if at all possible, you know unequivocally what direction you're supposed to go in. That, in conjunction with listening to the race organizer at the beginning of the race, if they have to make an adjustment on the fly due to road conditions or construction or something going on, then you have to listen to that and make those adjustments. But 99 times out of 100, you're going to follow the course that they laid out on Bike Reg or whatever they're using. And if you put it in your head unit, you've really eliminated a lot of those possibilities to fail. So that's it for my screens. Those are 3 different profiles that I use. I know that was a lot of information. I did want to go into some of those metrics and why they're of value. I know a lot of you who watch this channel have kind of found me in your new cycling adventures, came on board for Zwift, maybe looking at going outside. So this is going to be new to a lot of you folks out there. So I appreciate the patience. I appreciate those of you who made it all the way to the end of this video. If you have any comments or questions or concerns, let me know in the comments below. As I said before, the possibilities are endless with these things. There are metrics that I didn't even talk about on here that are super cool that might be great for you. So explore, set up your data screens the way that you see fit, the way that might be helpful for you. They're probably going to change with time as you advance as a rider. This is a lifelong sport. I hope that you guys are along for the ride. No pun intended, of course. But if you got any value out of this video, if you wouldn't mind hitting that thumbs up button, it really does help the video and the channel quite a bit. Subscribe if you haven't already. Again, no promise of the Cool Kids Club, but fun, fast, and free. Good efforts. And as always, I will catch you guys in the next one. See ya.